The atmospheric pressure over the Dagobah Municipal Beach Park did not drop. It shattered. It was not a meteorological event, nor was it the manifestation of a weather-altering quirk, for no genetic mutation rooted in human biology could scream with the sound of a dying star. The sky above Musutafu tore open at exactly 3 in the afternoon, turning the bright Japanese daylight into a bruised, swirling vortex of emerald and freezing sapphire. This was not the chaotic destruction of a villain attack, which the citizens were trained to endure, but a violation of physics that bypassed the fight-or-flight response entirely and triggered a primal mammalian paralysis. Windows across the coastal district blew inward not from wind, but from a sudden, violent displacement of gravity itself. The tectonic plates beneath the prefecture groaned, registering a seismic event that had no epicenter deep within the earth but rather pressed down from the heavens. A crushing weight that felt like the judgment of a higher order of existence. Pro-heroes on patrol reacted with the disciplined urgency of veterans, yet their instincts betrayed them. Kamui Woods attempted to secure a crumbling overpass, but his wood lacquers grew brittle and grey in seconds. The organic vitality drained by an alien cold that siphoned thermal energy from the very air. Mount Lady, attempting to grow to giant size to shield civilians from falling debris, found her size-shifting ability stuttering, her body flickering between states as the local laws of reality struggled to assert dominance over the intruder. The ambient energy pouring from the rift was not compatible with the quirk factors embedded in their DNA. It was older, heavier, and aggressively dominant. It tasted of ozone and ancient iron. The sensors at UX High School, designed to detect high-yield energy discharges, flatlined instantly, their needles stripped by a surge that exceeded the theoretical maximums of biological power generation. This was the first sign that the conflict to come would not be a battle of muscles or training, but a collision of incompatible cosmologies. At the center of the vortex, the fabric of space-time finally failed. A beam of focused, hard light energy, similar to the Bifrost but darker and jagged with instability, hammered into the trash-strewn sands of the beach. The ocean recoiled. Millions of gallons of seawater vaporized instantly, creating a dense, superheated fog that rolled over the city, carrying the scent of burning frost. The impact crater fused the sand into obsidian glass, radiating a heat that warped the air. Inside the crater, the silence that followed was louder than the explosion. There was no monster roaring, no Nomu screeching for orders. There was only a figure, kneeling in the center of the smoking glass. He was clad in leather and metal that looked too intricate for human manufacture. His skin pale as a corpse, his black hair matted with the frost of the interstellar void. Loki Odinson did not stand immediately. He coughed, and the sound was wet and ragged. His body, dense with Asgardian tissue and fueled by magic that defied the conservation of mass, was knitting itself back together after a fall that should have atomized a moon. He gripped the scepter in his hand, the Mind Stone within it pulsing with a dull, frantic rhythm, sensing a world teeming with minds that were loud, chaotic, and unguarded. The god looked up, his eyes sweeping across the skyline of a city that was too bright, too loud, and entirely wrong. He saw the pro-heroes descending through the steam, their costumes gaudy, their powers radiating a biological hum that felt distinct from the spiritual energy of the 9 realms. He felt the absence of Heimdall's gaze. He felt the silence of Thanos. And then he felt the pain. It was not just physical injury. It was the metaphysical shock of entering a closed system. His magic reached out to grab the ley lines of this world and found nothing but the crude, biological energy of quirks. He was a creature of myth, stranded in a universe of biology. Loki smiled, blood coating his teeth, a smile of desperate, terrifying opportunity. If this world had no gods, it was in desperate need of one. The ground beneath him cracked again as he stood, the sheer density of his existence bruising the earth, marking the exact moment history bifurcated. The age of heroes was effectively over. The age of sovereignty had begun. The impact crater on Dagobah Municipal Beach was rapidly becoming a theater of war as the local authorities attempted to assert control over a variable they could not comprehend. The steam rising from the vaporized ocean water hung thick and oppressive, creating a humid microclimate that clung to the skin of the first responders. Kamui Woods was the first to engage, his instincts honed by years of suppressing violent quirk users in urban environments. He launched his lacquered chains prison, extensions of dense wood shooting forward to bind the intruder's limbs. To the pro-hero, this was a standard containment maneuver, effective against 90% of physical mutation quirks. To Loki Odinson, it was a biological insult. The Asgardian did not dodge. He simply allowed the wood to wrap around his armor, feeling the tensile strength of the fibers. It was strong, stronger than earth oak, but it lacked the enchantment of the forests of Vanaheim. With a casual exertion of Asgardian muscle density, which was 3 times that of a human and fortified by centuries of combat, Loki flexed his arms. The wood did not snap. It exploded into splinters, the force of the breakage sending shards flying like shrapnel into the surrounding debris. Kamui Woods recoiled, his arms retracting in a spasm of sympathetic pain, his mind struggling to categorize the villain's strength rating. It was not a strength enhancement quirk. There was no telltale muscle expansion or energy discharge. It was simply a base state of existence that exceeded the structural limits of the hero's material. Death Arms charged next, banking on his immense physical power to subdue the target. He struck Loki square in the chest, a blow that would have derailed a locomotive. The sound was a dull, metallic thud, like a sledgehammer striking a solid anvil. Death Arms felt the bones in his wrist compress, a shockwave travelling up his radius and ulna, nearly fracturing his own skeleton. Loki slid back 3 inches in the obsidian sand. He looked down at the hero's fist pressed against his leather cuirass, his expression one of mild curiosity rather than pain. The kinetic energy transfer was negligible to a being who had traded blows with frost giants. Loki backhanded the hero, a motion that looked dismissive rather than aggressive. The blow caught Death Arms on the shoulder, lifting the 300-pound man off the ground and skipping him across the fused glass of the beach like a flat stone. The violence was economical, devoid of the screaming exertion that characterized this world's conflicts. It was the violence of a higher magnitude of being disciplining a lower one. Mount Lady, realizing the escalating threat, activated her gigantification quirk. She towered over the smog, her shadow falling across the crater. She raised a colossal foot to stomp the intruder, a tactic that relied on pure mass to end engagements. Loki looked up, his green eyes narrowing. He did not see a giant woman. He saw a clumsy manipulation of biological mass, a fragile ballooning of cells that retained human vulnerabilities. As the foot descended, Loki raised the scepter. He did not fire a blast. Instead, he tapped into the Mind Stone's resonance, projecting a psychic suggestion of absolute terror directly into the hero's amygdala. He showed her the void between stars. He showed her the cold death of the universe. Mount Lady screamed, a sound that shattered windows a mile away and shrank instantly back to her normal size, curling into a fetal position on the sand, her mind besieged by cosmic horror that her human psyche had no framework to process. The perimeter was collapsing. The police force, armed with standard firearms, hesitated to fire, their training manuals offering no guidance for a suspect who dismantled top-tier heroes without moving his feet. Loki observed them, his tactical mind dissecting this reality. They were not soldiers. They were performers. Their costumes were bright, designed for visibility rather than camouflage. They announced their attacks. They prioritized property damage control over the neutralization of the threat. It was a society that had commodified heroism, turning the warrior's path into a bureaucratic function. It disgusted him, yet it fascinated him. He sensed no magic in the air, only the hum of genetics. These were mutants, children playing with loaded guns, lacking the discipline of sorcery or the wisdom of the Odin sleep. He tapped the scepter against the ground again, sending a ripple of illusory duplicates shimmering into existence. Suddenly, there were 50 Lokis standing on the beach, each one radiating a tangible presence. The heroes froze, their sensory inputs overwhelmed. But then, the air pressure changed again. This time, it was not the cold vacuum of space, but a wall of kinetic heat. A figure launched from the city center, moving so fast that the sonic boom arrived seconds after his appearance. All Might landed at the edge of the crater. The force of his arrival blew away the steam, the illusions, and the top layer of sand. He stood tall, his smile fixed and beaming, a symbol of absolute reassurance. But Loki, with his eyes that could perceive the flow of life force, saw the truth instantly. He saw the rotting injury in the man's side. He saw the embers of a dying fire. He saw a god of this world who was bleeding out. All Might did not hesitate. He assessed the downed heroes and the unhurt villain, and engaged with a speed that startled even the Asgardian. The Texas smash that followed was not a test. It was a finisher. The punch connected with Loki's jaw, and for the first time since his arrival, the god felt pain, true pain. His head snapped back, his vision whiting out for a fraction of a second. The force lifted him off his feet and hurled him into the ocean. The water erupted into a geyser 300 feet high. Loki tumbled through the surf, correcting his spin with telekinetic grace, his boots skidding on the surface of the water as he stabilized. He wiped a streak of purple ichor from his lip. This one was different. This one hit with the force of a Hulk, but with the focused intent of a Valkyrie. Loki raised the scepter, firing a bolt of pure cohesive energy. All Might dodged, the beam carving a trench through the ocean that exposed the seabed. The symbol of peace closed the distance, weaving through the barrage with terrifying agility. He was shouting something, commands to surrender, declarations of justice, but Loki tuned out the rhetoric. He was analyzing the threat. The man was purely physical. No magic defenses, no psychic barriers. But his will was a fortress. The Mind Stone pulsed, attempting to find a purchase in All Might's psyche. But the hero's singular determination acted as a natural occlumency shield. His conviction was so absolute it warped the psychic space around him. Loki realized he could not win this contest in a brawl. His body was still recovering from the fall through the void. He was cut off from the Odin force. The Tesseract was gone. If he escalated to high-level sorcery, he risked shattering his own physical form, which was already under immense strain. And more importantly, he saw the cameras. Helicopters were circling. The world was watching. A king does not brawl in the mud. He orchestrates. A defeat here, properly managed, would yield more intelligence than a victory. He needed to see the inside of their cages. He needed to understand the hierarchy of this realm. as All Might wound up for a Detroit smash, a blow that gathered the wind pressure of a hurricane. Loki made a split-second calculation. He dropped his guard. He allowed the illusion of exhaustion to flicker across his face. He let the scepter hang loosely. The punch connected with his chest, pulling the punch at the last microsecond as All Might sensed the surrender. But the impact still cracked the Asgardian's ribs and sent him flying back onto the beach, skipping across the glass and coming to a halt at the feet of the terrified police line. Loki lay there, groaning theatrically, though his physiology was already knitting the bone back together. He released the scepter, letting it roll across the sand. He raised his hands. The arrest was chaotic. The police used quirk-suppressing handcuffs, thick bands of metal designed to dampen genetic activation. As they clicked onto Loki's wrists, he felt absolutely nothing happen. His magic was not genetic. It was fundamental. The cuffs were inert jewelry to him. Yet, he feigned weakness, slumping as if his power had been drained. This confirmed his hypothesis. They believed his power was biological. They believed they had neutralized him. This error was the first key to his eventual conquest. He was loaded into an armored transport, a mobile cell lined with reinforced titanium. He sat in the darkness, the Mind Stone separated from him and placed in a containment case that hummed with cautionary sensors. He closed his eyes and extended his consciousness, not through the stone, but through the subtle arts of Seda, listening to the thoughts of the guards in the front cabin. They spoke of fear. They spoke of the Nomu rumors. They spoke of the UA entrance exams approaching. They debated his villain name. They were terrified. Loki smiled in the dark. Fear was a currency he knew how to spend. The transport did not go to a standard precinct. It headed straight for the Tartarus containment facility, a testament to the threat level All Might had assigned him. But before the deep incarceration, there was the processing. He was stripped of his Asgardian leather, an act he permitted with icy dignity, and dressed in an orange jumpsuit that chafed against skin accustomed to silk and void metal. He was brought to an interrogation room that mirrored the sterile aesthetic of S.H.I.E.L.D., but with less paranoia and more bureaucracy. Across the metal table sat a man in a trench coat, Detective Tsukochi. Loki sensed the man's ability immediately, a subtle, vibrating aura that reacted to the intent of speech. A truthsayer, a living lie detector. This was dangerous. A lie detector could unravel a deception. But against the god of lies, it was merely a game of semantics. Tsukuchi looked tired. He had a stack of files, none of which contained a single match for Loki's fingerprints or DNA. The detective asked for a name. Loki gave it. Loki of Asgard. The truth register dinged. Tsukuchi frowned, assuming it was the villain alias. He asked for a quirk registry number. Loki replied, "I am not registered in your archives." "True." He asked about the weapon. "It is a scepter given to me by a king to rule a world." "True." He asked his purpose. "To burden you with my glorious purpose." "True." Tsukochi was sweating. Every answer registered as absolute truth, yet the narrative made no sense. The DNA analysis came back during the interrogation. The technician entered the room, pale and shaking, whispering to the detective. The DNA had triple helix structures. It was dense, unidentified, and decidedly non-human. It matched no known mutation profile. They couldn't classify him. Was he a mutant? An alien? A distinct species? The uncertainty paralyzed their legal framework. In this society, everything was categorized. Heroes, villains, vigilantes, civilians. Quirks were catalogued, ranked, and regulated. Loki existed outside the catalogue. He was an out-of-context problem. They decided to label him a Class S villain of unknown origin. pending further review by the Hero Public Safety Commission. Meanwhile, the Scepter was being transported to a secure vault within UA High School. Nezu, the principal, insisted on studying the energy signature, which defied the laws of quirk thermodynamics. He sensed that the object was dangerous, perhaps more dangerous than the man who wielded it. The Mind Stone sat in the darkness of the vault, humming. It was separated from Loki, yet they were entangled. Loki could feel where it was. He could feel the proximity of young, malleable minds. He could feel the ambition of the students preparing for their hero academia. One student in particular caught the ambient frequency of the event. Izuku Midoriya, sitting in his room, watched the shaky phone footage of the battle on Dagobah Beach for the 100th time. He analyzed the movements. He saw All Might struggle, but mostly he looked at Loki. He saw the way the villain had looked at the heroes, not with hatred, but with disappointment. He saw the way Loki had taken a hit that would have vaporized a normal human and simply stood up. Izuku wrote in his notebook, his hand shaking. Villain, unknown. Quirk, invulnerability, reality warping. Notes, he didn't use a quirk to fly. He walked on the air. He didn't use a quirk to make duplicates. He refracted light. It's like magic. The boy paused. He scratched out the word magic. It was unscientific, but the feeling remained. The world had just gotten bigger and scarier. In the bowels of Tartarus, Loki sat in his cell. The straitjacket was tight. The walls were soundproofed. The cameras were unblinking. He was isolated, defeated. Prisoner number 9494. But in the silence of his mind, he was drafting a map. He had felt the weakness in All Might. He had felt the rigidity of their laws. He had felt the desperation of the villains he had passed in the hallway. Stain, All for One, Overhaul. Names whispered in the ether. Potential pawns, potential rivals. Loki closed his eyes and began to hum a tune from the halls of Valhalla. The suppression collars around his neck hummed with electricity, detecting the vocalization, but they did not shock him. They were calibrated for quirks. They could not detect the spell he was weaving with his voice. A simple locating spell. A thread cast out into the dark to find the one thing he needed. Not the Tesseract, not the Scepter. He needed a believer. Faith was the battery of the gods, and in a world of superheroes, faith was a commodity that was heavily trafficked, but poorly refined. He found a mind, weak, fractured, desperate for guidance, a villain in the adjacent block, a man who could clone himself, twice. The mind was chaotic, a storm of conflicting voices. Perfect, Loki whispered into the astral plane, his voice bypassing the concrete and the steel, resonating directly in the skull of Jin Bubaigawara. Quiet, mortal. The voices are lies. I am the truth. Listen to me, and I will make you whole. A whisper in the dark, and the slow, creeping realization within the security systems of Tartarus that the prisoner in cell block 4 was not contained. He was simply waiting. The first breach was physical. The second breach would be ideological. The world of My Hero Academia had survived the impact of a god. Now it had to survive his politics. The quarantine of the alien element had failed before it even began, for ideas could not be handcuffed, and Loki Odinson was, above all else, a very bad idea. The silence of Tartarus was not empty. It was heavy, pressurized, and engineered to crush the human spirit. But to a frost giant prince who had spent centuries in the dungeons of Asgard, it was merely a dull waiting room. Loki sat cross-legged in the center of cell 9494, his orange jumpsuit pristine, his eyes closed. To the guards watching the thermal monitors, he appeared to be sleeping. His heart rate slowed to a reptilian crawl. In reality, he was conducting surgery. His mind had drilled a microscopic tunnel through the psychic dampeners of the prison, a feat that required 3 days of uninterrupted concentration, aiming for the chaotic, fractured psyche in the cell adjacent to his. Jin Bobagawara, the villain known as Twice, was currently huddled in the corner of his containment unit, rocking back and forth, whispering to entities that were not there. His mask had been confiscated, leaving his identity unspooled, his mind splitting into a dozen arguing fragments. Then the arguing stopped. A single voice, cold and smooth as polished ice, cut through the noise in Jin's head. It did not ask for permission. It commanded order. Loki was weaving a spell of stabilization, not out of kindness, but out of necessity. He needed a radio, and Twice was the perfect frequency. By knitting the man's mind back together, binding the fractures with the golden thread of divine will, Loki purchased a soul. Jin stopped rocking. He looked at the wall separating him from the alien god. For the first time in years, he was one person. He was silent, and in that silence, he knelt. The guards noted the behavioral shift in prisoner 5920, but attributed it to the sedatives. They did not understand that a conversion had taken place. 10 miles away, deep within the subterranean secure archives of UA High School, Principal Nezu stared at the Scepter. It lay inside a containment field designed by Power Loader, surrounded by sensors that measured radiation, thermal variance, and dimensional stability. The Mind Stone hummed. It was a low, throbbing sound that bypassed the auditory nerves and vibrated directly in the base of the skull. Nezu, a creature of high intelligence and logic, found himself irritated. The Scepter defied classification. It was emitting a wavelength that suggested it was broadcasting, but there was no receiver. The mouse-beared dog Chimera tapped his paw on the console. He had authorized the transfer of the object to UA, under the pretense of keeping it away from the inept hands of the police force. But privately, his curiosity had been weaponized. He reached out to adjust the sensor gain, and a spark of yellow electricity jumped from the containment glass at his claw. It didn't burn. It enlightened. For a microsecond, Nezu saw a mathematical equation that described the collapse of heroic society. He saw the probability of all might's fall. He saw the inevitable heat death of the universe. He pulled his hand back, trembling. The Scepter was not a weapon. It was an argument, and it was winning. He ordered the vault sealed, triple locking the blast doors, but the damage was done. The seed of fatalism had been planted in the most brilliant mind in Japan. The catastrophe began not with a bang, but with a scheduled field trip. Class 1A boarded the bus for the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, a facility designed to teach disaster rescue. Aizawa Shota sat at the front, his eyes tired, his instincts itching like a healing scab. He felt the air pressure drop as they traveled, a subtle atmospheric shift that reminded him of the report from Dagobah Beach. He dismissed it as paranoia. He was wrong. When the bus arrived at the USJ, the massive dome was already compromised. The lights flickered. The space-time coordinates of the facility were being rewritten. Inside, 13 greeted the students, but the lecture on safety was cut short by the tearing sound of reality failing. In the central plaza, a black vortex swirled into existence. It was not the clean, scientific warping of Kurogiri's quirk. It was ragged, bleeding purple smoke and the smell of ozone. Shigaraki Tomura stepped out, scratching his neck, his eyes manic. But he was not alone. Behind him, the warp gate did not close. It widened, forced open by a golden mechanism that looked like a ribcage of light. This was the League of Villains countermove, funded by a benefactor who had taken an interest in the alien event. All for One had provided Shigaraki with a modified Nomu, a creature bioengineered not just to absorb shock, but to metabolize unknown energy signatures. They had fed the creature the glassified sand from Dagobah Beach, forcing the Asgardian residue into its biology. The result was a monstrosity that glowed with sick, pale veins. It did not screech, it hummed. As the villains poured out, Aizawa leaped into action, his scarf flying, his eyes glowing red. He targeted the grunt villains, erasing their quirks, moving with the fluid efficiency of a veteran. He took down 3 men in seconds, then turned his gaze to the glowing Nomu. He activated erasure. The red glow of his quirk washed over the beast. Logically, the creature's power should have cut off. Biologically, its muscles should have relaxed. Instead, the Nomu looked at him. The hum grew louder. The creature's power was not a quirk factor located in the DNA. It was a necrotic enchantment grafted onto dead flesh. Erasure found no purchase. It slipped off the magic like water off oil. Aizawa's eyes widened a fraction of a second before the Nomu moved. The speed was impossible. It wasn't a leap. It was a linear displacement of mass. The creature was in front of him instantly. Aizawa dodged, but the Nomu's fist didn't need to connect physically. A shockwave of repulsive energy, the distorted byproduct of Asgardian magic mixed with earthly biology, slammed into the hero. Aizawa's right arm shattered. The bones didn't just break, they pulverized. He was thrown backward, crashing into the base of the central fountain. The students on the observation deck screamed. Midoriya Izuku gripped the railing, his knuckles white. He saw what Aizawa saw. The rules of their world, the immutable laws that said a quirk could be erased, that physics could be trusted, had just been violated. The Nomu stood over the broken hero, charging a sphere of energy in its mouth that looked like a corrupted copy of the Scepter's blast. Back in Tartarus, Loki stood up. He walked to the reinforced glass of his cell. He raised a hand, palm open, fingers splayed. He was miles away from the USJ, but distance was a triviality to a sorcerer who had walked the branches of Yggdrasil. He was not escaping. He was conducting. He closed his hand into a fist. At UA High, in the deep vault, the scepter activated. It did not care about the 3 feet of lead or the energy shields. It answered the call of its master. A beam of pure, focused Mind Stone energy erupted from the tip of the staff. It sliced through the containment glass, melted through the blast doors, and pierced the ceiling of the underground complex. The beam shot upward, carving a hole through the floors of the school, vaporizing desks, equipment, and the structural concrete of the main building. It punched through the roof of UA, a lance of yellow light ascending into the sky, visible for miles. Then it refracted, bending at a 90-degree angle that defied all ballistic logic. The beam shot across the city of Musutafu, creating a thunderclap that shattered windows in every building beneath its path. It was a highway of light connecting the prison of the Scepter to the theater of the war. The beam struck the dome of the USJ. The reinforced glass and steel exploded inward. The beam did not hit the ground. It hit the Nomu. The creature, already unstable, convulsed as the pure cosmic energy flooded its corrupted system. Shigaruka shielded his eyes, laughing maniacally, thinking this was his power, his victory. He was wrong. The Nomu began to change. Its skin split, revealing muscle that shone like gold bullion. It grew, its bone structure warping into a mockery of Asgardian armor. The creature threw its head back and released a sound that was not a scream, but a word. A single garbled word in a tongue dead for 5,000 years. Release. The shockwave flattened the central plaza. The water in the shipwreck zone evaporated. The landslide zone collapsed. The students were blown off their feet. Midoriya grabbed Asui and Mineta, shielding them as debris rained down. When the dust cleared, the Nomu was gone. In its place stood a titan, 12 feet tall, burning with a golden aura that scorched the air. It turned its eyes, burning yellow eyes, on the students. It was no longer a bioengineered weapon. It was a golem of the Infinity Stones. It raised a hand, and the gravity in the USJ reversed. Rocks, water, and villains began to float upward. The doors to the USJ burst open. All Might had arrived. He was not smiling. He had seen the beam from the city. He had felt the disturbance. He launched himself at the Golden Nomu. A Detroit smash charged with 100% of One for All. The fist collided with the creature's face. The impact created a vacuum sphere that stripped the paint off the walls, but the Nomu did not budge. It absorbed the kinetic energy, the golden aura flaring brighter. It caught All Might's fist. The symbol of peace froze. He pulled, but his hand was immovable. The creature looked at All Might, and for the first time, All Might felt the crushing weight of an inferior match. This was not a villain he could punch into submission. This was a battery he could not drain. The Nomu squeezed. All Might gasped, the bones in his hand grinding. Loki, in his cell, smiled. He whispered a single word. Burn. The Nomu released a pulse of energy directly into All Might's body. It wasn't physical damage. It was metaphysical poison. The energy attacked the connection between All Might and One for All, scorching the embers of the stockpile power. All Might roared, a sound of agony that was broadcast over the surviving facility speakers. He was thrown back, skidding across the concrete, steam rising from his body. But it wasn't the steam of exertion. It was the smoke of a dying form. He flickered. The muscle form wavered, shrinking for a split second to reveal the skeleton beneath, then ballooning back up through sheer force of will. The secret was fraying. The student saw it. Midoriya saw it. The terror was absolute. Their god was bleeding. Their teacher was broken. The enemy was evolving. The Golden Nomu turned away from All Might, deeming him insufficient, and looked at the cowering students. It raised its hand again, preparing to wipe the slate clean. But the catastrophe was not just a physical threat. It was the breach of the world's logic. Outside the USJ, the beam that had connected UA to the facility had not dissipated without cost. The air through which it passed had been ionized with magic. As the police and paramedics rushed to the scene, their vehicles stalled. Their radios died. And then the mutations began. People who had been caught in the shadow of the beam, civilians in their apartments, office workers, children in playgrounds, collapsed. Their quirks began to misfire. A woman with a telekinesis quirk suddenly found her own bones twisting under her mental command. A man with a fire quirk incinerated himself from the inside out. The incompatibility of the Scepter's energy with the quirk gene triggered a localized plague. It was immediate, visceral, and horrifying. The hospitals were flooded within minutes, not with blast victims, but with genetic meltdowns. At the USJ, the Golden Nomu prepared to fire. Midoriya realized that All Might couldn't move fast enough. The boy moved. He didn't think. He reacted. He activated One for All, feeling the power surge through his legs. He didn't aim for the Nomu. He aimed for the ground beneath the students. Smash! The floor collapsed, dropping the students into the drainage tunnels below, just as the golden beam swept over their heads, vaporizing the observation deck where they had stood a second before. They fell into the darkness, alive but separated, trapped in the underbelly of a facility that was being dismantled by a power from another universe. Above them, the golden Nomu roared again, but the roar was cut short. The creature seized. The infusion of the Mind Stone was too potent for the dead biology. The Nomu began to leak light. It was going critical. All Might saw the danger. If the creature exploded, it would take the USJ and half the district with it. He forced himself up, blood pouring from his mouth. He had to punch the creature out of the dome. He had to go beyond his limit. But as he wound up, he felt the void where his power used to be. It was significantly smaller. The attack had permanently burned away months of his remaining time. He didn't care. Plus, Ultra. All Might grabbed the glowing titan by the waist, ignoring the radiation burns, searing his hands, and launched himself vertically. He drove the creature up, through the shattered glass of the dome, into the sky. High above the clouds, he released the creature and delivered a final desperate smash to send it into the upper atmosphere. The Nomu detonated. The explosion was silent at first, a sphere of gold expanding against the blue, followed by a shockwave that cleared the sky of clouds for 100 miles. The light blinded the city. All Might fell. He plummeted back to Earth, his form failing. He crashed into the ruins of the USJ Plaza, a skinny, skeletal man in baggy clothes, coughing up blood. The dust settled. The villains had retreated through Kurogiri's warp gate, terrified by their own weapon. The students crawled out of the tunnels. Bakugo was the first to see him. He stared at the frail man lying in the crater. He looked at the dust. He looked at the empty sky. He didn't recognize the man, but he recognized the despair. The sirens finally penetrating the ringing silence of the USJ. The Scepter's beam had faded, but the scar across the sky remained, a faint, aurora-like shimmer that refused to vanish. The world had not ended, but the illusion of stability had been incinerated. UA was breached. The symbol of peace was unmasked to his students, though they didn't fully understand who he was yet. Civilians were dying of a magical sickness, and in Tartarus, Loki ceased his meditation. He opened his eyes and looked at the camera. He didn't smile, he simply nodded. The first move was complete. The board was set. The heroes were no longer fighting crime. They were fighting obsolescence. The fallout from the unforeseen simulation joint incident did not settle like dust. It festered like a gangrenous wound in the side of Japanese society. The beam of cohesive Mind Stone energy that had connected UA High School to the facility had dissipated, but the scar it left on the atmosphere remained visible as a faint, iridescent bruised line in the sky that glowed violet at twilight. Beneath this celestial laceration, the city of Musutafu was suffering from a contagion that defied every medical textbook in the developed world. The hospitals were not just full, they were turning into morgues for the living. The condition was colloquially named the gilded sickness by the terrified populace, though the official medical designation was metaphysical cellular rejection syndrome. Victims who had been caught in the ionization wake of the Scepter's beam were not suffering from radiation poisoning in the nuclear sense. Instead, their quirk factors, the genetic clusters that define their individuality and biological function, were being forcibly rewritten by an imposition of foreign order. A woman with a water generation quirk lay in the ICU of Musutafu General, her skin turning into literal, living glass, her internal fluids freezing into static crystal, not because of temperature, but because the concept of fluidity in her biology was being overwritten by the concept of stasis emanating from the residue of the stone. Doctors who attempted to operate found their scalpels shattering against flesh that had momentarily adopted the density of Uru metal. The screaming in the wards was constant, a chorus of biological panic as human bodies fought a war against the physics of a different universe. Recovery Girl, the cornerstone of hero medical stability, stood over the bed of Eraserhead in the secure wing of the UA infirmary. Aizawa was sedated, his face pale and drawn. His right arm, which had been struck by the shockwave of the golden Nomu, was not healing. The bones had been pulverized, yes, but Recovery Girl's quirk, which accelerated the body's natural healing processes, was failing. Every time she kissed his forehead, pushing her energy into his system, it rebounded. The injury felt cold to her vital sensing. It wasn't necrotic tissue. It was an absence of biological reality. The flesh was grey, unresponsive, and smelled faintly of ozone and ancient dust. She looked at Principal Nezu, who sat on a stool nearby, his paws clutching a tablet displaying bio-readouts that made no sense. The data showed Aizawa's cells were not dying. They were simply refusing to acknowledge they were part of a human body anymore. They had been told they were stone, and they were obeying that command with terrifying loyalty. Nezu, the smartest being on the planet, looked defeated. He realized that they were trying to treat a poem with antibiotics. The injury was semantic, not somatic. Aizawa's arm had been erased, not by a quirk, but by a decree. The panic outside the walls of UA was shifting from fear to anger. The Hero Public Safety Commission was hemorrhaging credibility. The commission president held emergency meetings in a bunker beneath Tokyo, surrounded by analysts who were frantically trying to spin the narrative. They tried to blame the League of Villains. They tried to blame a foreign bioweapon. But the leaked footage from the USJ, grainy, chaotic video taken by a terrified student's phone, showed the truth. It showed the golden Nomu. It showed the beam from UA. And most damningly, it showed All Might bleeding. The image of the symbol of peace, skeletal and gasping in the crater, had been suppressed by the Commission's cybersecurity team, scrubbed from the internet within seconds of upload. But seconds were enough. The rumor mill was grinding the bedrock of society into sand. People whispered that All Might was dying. They whispered that UA was hoarding a weapon they couldn't control. They whispered that the man in the crater at the beach was not a villain, but a harbinger. In the deepest level of Tartarus, the harbinger was waiting. Loki Odinson sat in his cell, his eyes fixed on the blank metal wall. He was no longer in a straitjacket. The guards had removed it after he had accidentally dislocated both his shoulders to slip out of it, then reset them with a sickening crunch while maintaining eye contact with the camera. The display of casual brutality had unnerved the warden enough to grant him basic mobility in exchange for compliance. Loki was compliant. He was perfectly, maliciously compliant. He ate the tasteless nutrient paste. He stood for inspection. He answered questions with riddles that registered as truth on every lie detector. But he was busy. His magic, dampened by the suppression field of the prison, was a trickle, not a river. But a trickle was enough to erode stone if given time. He was projecting his voice, not acoustically, but mentally. He had found the resonance frequency of the prison's electrical grid and was using the 60-cycle hum of the lights to carry his whispers into the cells of the other inmates. He spoke to Stain. The hero killer was strapped to a vertical slab in solitary confinement, his eyes bandaged. Stain was a man of conviction, a zealot who believed in the purity of heroism. Loki found this amusing. He whispered to Stain about the hypocrisy of a system that relied on genetic lottery rather than divine mandate. He whispered that all might was a false idol, a dying man propping up a rotting structure. He told Stain that true order required a king, not a symbol. Stain resisted at first, gritting his teeth, chanting his own manifesto. But the voice was relentless. It didn't sound like a villain. It sounded like history. It sounded like the inevitable turning of a page. Loki didn't want Stain to serve him. He wanted Stain to destroy the board so that Loki could rebuild it. He spoke to All for One. This was a more dangerous game. The ancient villain, imprisoned in the lowest, most secure vault, sensed the intruder in his mind immediately. All for One did not have a telepathy quirk, but he had a sensory stealing quirk that allowed him to feel the vibrations of intent. He reached back. The conversation between the Demon King of Japan and the God of Mischief was silent, conducted in the static between thoughts. All for One was intrigued. He had sensed the golden power at the USJ. He knew his Nomu had been transformed. He wanted that power. He offered Loki a partnership. He offered escape. Loki laughed, a sound that echoed only in All for One's skull. Loki mocked the man's ambition. "You collect quirks like a child collects insects," Loki projected. "You stitch them together hoping to build a dragon. But you only build monsters. I am the dragon." All for One felt a chill he hadn't felt in a century. This intruder was not a metahuman. The texture of Loki's mind was dense, heavy, and incredibly old. It felt like touching the bottom of the ocean. Back at UA, the faculty meeting was a funeral dirge. All Might sat at the head of the table, not in his buff form, but in his true, emaciated state. He was coughing into a handkerchief that came away spotted with black blood. The feedback from the Golden Nomu had done more than burn his time. It had infected the stockpiled power of One for All. He could feel the vestiges of the past users screaming in the back of his mind, their voices distorted by static. The power was sluggish, resisting his call. It was terrified. Midoriya Izuku, who had been allowed to attend the meeting as a successor, sat next to him, looking at his hands. Midoriya had felt it too. When he had used the power at the USJ, it hadn't felt like a discharge of energy. It felt like he was pushing against a heavy door that was being held shut from the other side. Nezu placed the scepter on the table. It was contained in a new case, a transparent aluminum alloy box lined with lead and blessed Shinto talismans, a desperate attempt to combine science and spirituality. The Mind Stone was dormant, but the blue gem casing pulsed with a rhythmic, heartbeat-like light. "We are at an impasse," Nezu squeaked, his tail twitching anxiously. "The scepter is the source of the contagion affecting the city. It is broadcasting a signal that rewrites biological reality. We cannot shut it off. We cannot destroy it. Every attempt to analyze it results in equipment failure or researcher psychosis. We have 3 scientists in the psych ward who claim the stone is judging them." Endeavor, standing in the corner with his arms crossed, his flames burning low and angry, scoffed. "Then we throw it into the sun. I'll take it up myself if I have to." "You would never make orbit," Nezu replied coldly. "And even if you did, the energy density of the stone suggests it would survive a stellar entry. Furthermore, moving it seems to agitate the signal. The last time we attempted to transport it to a deeper vault, the crystallization rate in the hospital wards spiked by 40%. It wants to stay here. It wants to be found." "Found by who?" Aizawa rasped, clutching his dead arm. "By its owner," All Might said softly. The room went silent. I looked into his eyes on the beach. He surrendered too easily. He let us take him. He let us take the weapon. He's not trapped in Tartarus. He's waiting in Tartarus. Then we execute him, Endeavor said, his voice flat. We go to the prison. We burn him to ash, and the connection breaks. He survived a smash that changed the weather, All Might countered. You think fire will kill him, and if you strike him and he releases that energy, the explosion won't just take out the prison. It could crack the tectonic plate. We are dealing with a being whose durability is tied to the laws we don't understand. So we're hostages, Bakugo Katsuki said from the doorway. He had not been invited, but he had followed Deku. He stood there vibrating with suppressed rage. We're just sitting here waiting for the alien to make his move. That's what you're saying. The number one hero is scared. Young Bakugo, All Might started, but the boy cut him off. No, look at the news. People are turning into statues. My neighbor, she started coughing up glass yesterday. She's dead because we can't figure this out. You're supposed to be the strongest. If you can't beat him, then what's the point of UA? What's the point of any of us? Bakugo's voice cracked. It wasn't just anger. It was the terror of obsolescence. He had spent his life believing that being the strongest was the only truth. Now, a being existed that made strong irrelevant. The crisis reached its boiling point 2 days later. The contagion breached the quarantine zone. A child in a school 10 miles away from the original beam path collapsed, his skin turning to grey marble. The panic became a riot. Civilians stormed the police barricades around the National Diet building, demanding answers. The pro-heroes deployed to contain the riots were hesitant. They were fighting terrified families, not villains. Endeavor was on the front lines, creating walls of fire to separate the crowds, but the heat of the mob was rising. Then the ultimatum came. It didn't come from the villains. It came from the prison. The warden of Tartarus contacted the HPSC president. He wants to talk, the warden said, his voice shaking. Prisoner 9494. He says he can stop the plague. He says he's the only one who can turn the key. The HPSC president, a woman of steel and pragmatism, made the call that would doom her administration. She authorized the negotiation. She did not send All Might. She did not send Endeavor. She sent the only person who had managed to get a straight answer out of the alien. Detective Tsukuchi, but this time she sent him with an escort. Best Genius, the number 4 hero, and Edgeshot, the number 5. Restraint and speed. They were to go to Tartarus, enter the cell, and secure a cure. If Loki refused, they were authorized to use level 0 measures, experimental quirk-destroying drugs developed in secret labs, usually reserved for threats like All for One. The delegation arrived at Tartarus in silence. The prison was on high alert. The atmosphere was oppressive. As they descended the elevator to the deepest block, the lights flickered. The hum of the facility seemed to have a cadence, a musicality that shouldn't be there. When the blast doors opened, they found Loki standing in the center of the cell, unchained. The guards were slumped against the walls, not dead, but sleeping deeply, dreaming of golden halls. Loki looked at Tsukuchi and smiled. Detective, you look tired. The burden of truth is heavy when everyone around you is living a lie. Sit down, Loki, Tsukuchi ordered, his hand on his weapon. Best Genius unraveled the fibers of his denim sleeves, ready to bind the prisoner. Edgeshot flattened his body, disappearing into the seams of the air pressure, ready to strike the nerves. I prefer to stand, Loki said. It's better for the posture and for the projection. The sickness, Tsukuchi demanded. People are dying. Innocent people. You did this. I did nothing, Loki replied, spreading his hands. I merely arrived. Your world is allergic to greatness. Your genetics are fragile, crude things. They cannot withstand the proximity of the infinite. The Mind Stone is singing, and your bodies are trying to dance to a tune they cannot hear. They are breaking themselves in the attempt. Stop it, Best Genius commanded. Turn it off. I cannot turn off the nature of the universe, Loki said. But I can harmonize it. I can teach your flesh to endure the song. I can save them, all of them. The child turning to stone, the hero with the rotting arm, the symbol bleeding in his office. Tsukochi stiffened. How do you know about that? I know everything that minds know. Loki tapped his temple. The stone is not with me, but I am of it. We are entangled. Now here is the offer. I will heal the city. I will stabilize the stone. I will teach you how to contain it. And in exchange, Tsukochi asked, dreading the answer. I want a seat, Loki said. A seat. At the table. I do not wish to leave this prison. Not yet. It is safe here. Quiet. I want a position on the faculty of UA High School. The hero stared at him. It was absurd. Insane. You're a villain. Edgeshot hissed from the shadows. You murdered people. I defended myself against combatants, Loki corrected. And I am a king. Kings are educators of their people. Your UA trains children to be soldiers. I will train them to be rulers. I will teach a class, remote if you prefer, broadcast from this cell. But I will have access to the minds of the future. That is my price. Refuse, and the crystallization continues until your entire prefecture is a garden of statues. Tsukochi knew it was a trap. He knew that giving Loki access to students was like giving a wolf the keys to the nursery. But his phone buzzed. It was a text from the HPSC president. The crystallization rate has doubled. Casualty projections hit 10,000 by midnight. Do whatever it takes. We accept, Tsukochi said, the words tasting like ash. But you stay in the cell. You are monitored 24/7. One wrong word, one incitement to violence, and we flood the room with neurotoxin. Loki smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression of delight. Acceptable. Now observe. Loki raised his hand. He did not chant. He simply snapped his fingers. The sound of the snap echoed across the entire Kanto region. It wasn't a sound wave. It was a reality wave. At Musutafu General, the woman turning to glass gasped. The crystal receded, turning back into flesh. The ice in her blood melted. She sat up, weeping. Across the city, thousands of victims felt the heavy, crushing weight on their chests lift. The grey patches on their skin faded. In the UA infirmary, Aizawa screamed as feeling returned to his arm. The grey flesh flushed pink, then red. The bones knit together with a speed that defied biology, fueled by the same magic that had broken them. But there was a side effect. As the sickness left the victims, a faint golden residue remained in their eyes. For a moment, every cured citizen of Japan looked up and saw not the ceiling, but the face of Loki Odinson. They felt a surge of gratitude, a surge of loyalty. It was subtle, buried deep in the subconscious, but it was there. Loki hadn't just cured them, he had branded them. In Tartarus, Loki lowered his hand. Class is in session, he whispered. But this was not over. The escalation had triggered a reaction elsewhere. In the shadows of the warehouse district, the League of Villains watched the news reports of the miracle cure. Shigaraki scratched his neck until it bled. He was furious. The spotlight was gone. The fear was gone. It had been replaced by awe for the alien. He's cheating, Shigaraki hissed. He's playing a game with cheat codes. Sensei, I want him dead. I want his gear. Patience, Tamura. All for One's voice came from the monitor, but the voice was different. It was strained. All for One had felt the snap too. He had felt the power ripple through the ether. It was a power that made his collection of quirks feel like a pile of cheap plastic toys. He realized that to defeat Loki, or to consume him, he would need to evolve. He would need to abandon his humanity entirely. "We need the scepter," All for One said. "The alien controls the software, but the hardware is at UA. If we possess the stone, we possess the king. Prepare the Vanguard Action Squad. We are not going to kidnap a student this time. We are going to steal a god's heart." Meanwhile, inside UA, the faculty debated the new hire. Nezu was terrified, but also intellectually stimulated. He began setting up the secure broadcast link. The students of Class 1A were told that they would be having a special guest instructor for quirk theory and ethics. They were not told it was the villain who had nearly killed their teacher. Midoriya sat in the common room of the dorms, looking at his hand. He felt the one for all power humming. It felt different now. It felt defensive. The vestiges were awake, and they were whispering. They weren't talking about justice anymore. They were talking about the Golden King. Midoriya realized that the story of My Hero Academia was no longer about him becoming the greatest hero. It was about preventing a conquest that had already begun. Bakugo sat on the floor, staring at the TV screen where the news played a loop of the miracle. He saw the people crying with joy. He saw the interviews praising the mystery savior. He clenched his fist. He didn't win a fight, Bakugo muttered. He just decided to win. This shattered Bakugo's worldview. If victory could be granted by a snap, then effort was meaningless. The seed of nihilism was planted in the heart of the most driven student. And in the very back of the library, a student from Class 1B, Monoma Nato, touched a book that had been caught in the beam's path during the initial blast. He felt a tingle. He tried to copy the residue energy. Usually, he could only copy quirks, but this energy, it stuck. His eyes flared yellow for a second. He grinned. He had just copied a fraction of a god's power. It wasn't much, just a spark. But a spark was all a trickster needed. The image of Loki sitting on his cot in Tartarus, a holographic projection of the UA classroom appearing before him. He straightened his collar. He looked into the camera lens, which transmitted his image to the terrified, confused faces of Class 1A. "Greetings, children," Loki said, his voice silky and magnified by the speakers in the classroom. "Put away your textbooks. History is written by the victors, and I have a great deal of writing to do. Today's lesson is on the difference between a hero and a ruler. One reacts to the world, the other shapes it. Let us begin." The timeline had shifted irrevocably. The villain was now the teacher. The disease was the cure, and the invasion was no longer physical. It was cultural. The assimilation of Earth MHA into the hegemony of Loki had officially commenced. The classroom of Class 1A was silent, save for the hum of the cooling fans on the high-definition monitor that dominated the front of the room. The image was crisp, transmitting from the bowels of Tartarus in 4K resolution. Loki Odinson sat on his cot, legs crossed, a book of Nietzsche provided by the warden resting on his knee. He looked less like a prisoner and more like a monarch in exile holding court. The students sat at their desks, their postures rigid, their expressions a mixture of fear, fascination, and hostility. Bakugo Katsuki stared at the screen with eyes that burned with suppressed violence, his hands gripping the edges of his desk until the metal groaned. Ada Tenya had his notebook open, his pen hovering, torn between his duty as a student and his moral revulsion at learning from a villain. But they listened. They had no choice. The curriculum had been mandated by the Hero Public Safety Commission as part of the Armistice of the Cure. Loki did not teach math or history. He taught applied sovereignty. "You mistake power for authority," Loki said, his voice smooth and amplified, filling the room without shouting. "You believe that because you can punch a hole in a building, you have the right to decide who enters it. This is the fallacy of the muscle." All might was a muscle. He held up the sky with his shoulders. But what happens when the muscle tears? Gravity returns. The sky falls. A true ruler does not hold up the sky. He commands the sky to stay where it is. Yayoro Zumomo raised her hand, her voice trembling slightly. "But we are not rulers. We are heroes. We exist to serve the public, to protect them from harm. We are civil servants, not kings." Loki smiled, a terrifyingly gentle expression. "And that is why you are losing. You serve a public that turns to glass when the wind blows from the wrong dimension. You serve laws written by men who have never seen a god bleed. You limit your own creation, girl. I have watched you. You pull cannons and shields from your flesh, yet you hesitate to create gold. You hesitate to create dangerous things. You fear your own potential because you have been taught that power must be apologetic. In Asgard, a craftsman who fears his own hammer is not a smith. He is a casualty." The screen flickered as the connection stabilized against a surge of interference. Loki's eyes shifted, looking past the camera, as if seeing something through the walls of the prison. "The lesson is over for today," he said abruptly. "Prepare yourselves. The wolves are not at the door. They are in the hallway." Before Aizawa could ask what he meant, the alarms in UA High School screamed. It was not a drill. It was not the standard intruder alert. It was the catastrophic breach siren, a sound that had not been heard since the USJ. But this time, it was harmonized with a frantic, automated warning from the sub-basement sensors. Vault breach, seismic event, gamma spike. The timeline had shifted. In the original history, the League of Villains attacked the summer training camp to kidnap Bakugo. In this history, they did not care about Bakugo. They did not care about destroying the symbol of peace, for the symbol was already self-destructing. All for one, guided by a new, voracious hunger to possess the alien light, had authorized a direct assault on the school itself. He did not send a vanguard squad to distract. He sent an army to conquer. The barrier system of UA failed instantly. It did not break. It dissolved. Shigaraki Tomura stood at the main gate, his hands pressed against the steel. But it was not his decay quirk that brought the walls down. He was wearing gloves woven with fibers from the golden Nomu carcass, recovered from the blast zone by desperate scavengers and sold to the League. The gloves channeled a corrupted frequency of the Mind Stone's energy. When Shigaraki touched the barrier, the sensor array didn't register an attack. It registered a command from a superior administrator. The walls simply opened. The invasion force poured in. Twice, his mind fractured again after Loki cut the connection to focus on the broadcast, had unleashed a tidal wave of clones. They were not just cloning himself. They were cloning the weapons provided by the support item black market. A sea of grey-suited men flooded the campus. Darby unleashed blue flames that burned hotter than physics allowed, fueled by a rage that seemed to feed on the ambient, magical tension in the air. Toga Himiko moved like a phantom, her appearance shifting rapidly between students she had tagged, sowing chaos in the ranks of the defenders. But the true threat was underground. While the chaos erupted on the surface, a small, elite strike team led by Kurogiri warped directly into the lower levels. Their target was the Scepter. Class 1A was mobilized. Aizawa looked at the screen, where Loki was still sitting, calm and unbothered. What did you do? Aizawa hissed, his scarf floating around his neck, his eyes glowing red. I warned you, Loki replied. Now go, or don't. It makes little difference to the stone. It wishes to be held. Aizawa smashed the monitor with his fist, shattering the image of the god, and turned to his students. Stay together. Defend the corridors. Do not let them reach the vault. The battle that followed was not a superhero fight. It was a meat grinder. The students of UA were prepared for villains with quirks. They were not prepared for villains armed with Asgardian light technology. The League had retrofitted their Aigar with salvage from the beach landing. Compress was using marbles that didn't just compress targets. They trapped them in pocket dimensions that slowly drained their bioenergy. Spinner carried a sword forged from the scrap metal of the destroyer armor wreckage, a blade that could cut through Cementos's walls like wet paper. Midoriya Izuku, his cowl up, green lightning crackling around his body, moved through the smoke of the Gamma Gym. He was terrified. The one-for-all power was screaming at him. The danger sense was not a buzz. It was a constant, migraine-inducing shriek. He realized with horror that the danger wasn't just the villains. It was the Scepter. The closer the League got to the vault, the more the Scepter woke up. It was pulsing, sending waves of psychic static that made the students' movement sluggish. Midoriya ran into Muscular in the hallway leading to the elevator. The villain laughed, his muscle fibers erupting to fill the corridor. "Show me your blood, boy," Muscular roared. Midoriya didn't have time for a duel. He didn't have time to break his arms. He remembered Loki's lesson. A ruler commands the sky. Midoriya didn't wind up a punch. He stomped on the floor, channeling 20% of One for All into a precise seismic frequency he had observed Cementos use. He wasn't trying to hit Muscular. He was trying to break the floor's structural integrity at its weakest point. The concrete beneath Muscular pulverized. The villain fell through the floor into the basement level, screaming in confusion. Midoriya didn't stop to celebrate. He kept running. He had to get to the vault. He knew, with a certainty that bypassed logic, that if Shigaraki touched that stone, the world wouldn't just end. It would be rewritten. In the sub-basement, the blast doors to the vault were melting. Shigaraki stood before them, decay spreading from his fingers, eating through the lead and titanium. Beside him stood a new Nomu. This one was small, human-sized, jet black, with no exposed brain. It was silent. It was the high-end prototype, but modified. It had no quirk of its own. It was an empty vessel designed solely to hold the Scepter. The doors breached. The yellow light of the Mind Stone flooded the dark corridor, casting long, sharp shadows. Shigaraki stepped inside, his eyes manic behind the hand that covered his face. Finally, he rasped. The cheat code. "Stop." Midoriya burst into the room, skid stopping on the molten metal slag. He was alone. Aizawa was engaged with Dabi above. All Might was in his skeletal form, coordinating from the command center, unable to fight. It was just the boy and the end of the world. Shigaraki turned. "Ah, the NPC player. You're glitching, hero. You're in a cutscene you don't belong in." Shigaraki lunged. He didn't use decay. He moved with a speed that rivaled All Might's prime. All for One had given him a speed enhancement quirk, specifically for this moment. Midoriya reacted, full cowling kicking in, but he was too slow. Shigaraki's hand closed around Midoriya's throat. Midoriya felt the cold, dry skin. He felt the decay start to itch at his neck. But Shigaraki didn't kill him. He threw him. Midoriya slammed into the containment case of the Scepter, the glass cracking under the impact of his back. He slumped to the floor, gasping. Shigaraki walked past him, towards the scepter. The stone was humming loud now, a sound like a choir of bees. "Sensei wants this," Shigaraki muttered, reaching out. "But I think I'll keep it. I think I'll dust the whole game." Time slowed down. Midoriya looked at Shigaraki's hand inching towards the weapon. He looked at the cracked glass. He looked at his own broken gloves. He heard the voices of the vestiges. Nana Shimura was crying. The first user was silent. And then he heard another voice. "Pick it up." It wasn't a vestige. It was Loki. The voice was clear, cutting through the psychic noise. "The hand of the wicked will rot if it touches the divine. But you are a vessel of accumulated will. You are a container. Pick it up, boy. Claim your throne." Midoriya didn't think. It was the small choice. The choice to trust the villain in his head over the training in his heart. The choice to violate the rule that said, "Heroes secure evidence," and embrace the rule that said, "Kings wield power." Midoriya reached back, smashed the remaining glass with his elbow, and grabbed the scepter. The reaction was instantaneous. The moment Midoriya's skin touched the gold alloy of the Chitauri staff, the one-for-all quirk factor reacted with the Infinity Stone. It was a collision of two infinite systems. One for all was a power that stockpiled energy and will over time, a linear accumulation. The Mind Stone was a singularity of infinite consciousness, a constant absolute. The shockwave blew the roof off the underground vault. It blew the roof off the school. A pillar of green and yellow light erupted from UA, piercing the atmosphere and shooting into deep space. Shigaraki was blasted backward, his skin burning as if he had touched the sun. The high-end Nomu disintegrated instantly, its biology unable to withstand the mere presence of the awakened energy. Inside the pillar of light, Midoriya Izuku screamed. He was not being hurt, he was being expanded. His mind was being forcibly connected to every mind within a 1,000-mile radius. He felt the fear of the students. He felt the rage of Shigaraki. He felt the cold, calculating hunger of All for One in his hidden lair. He felt the loneliness of Loki in his cell. For 1 second, Midoriya Izuku was the mental administrator of Japan. "Stop," he commanded. He didn't speak the word. He thought it. And the Mind Stone amplified it into a psychic decree that hit every living brain in the blast radius. The battle at UA froze. Muscular stopped mid-punch, his eyes rolling back. Darby's flames died out as his brain forgot how to ignite them. Toga collapsed, weeping as the influx of pure emotion overwhelmed her psyche. Even the robot stopped. The silence was absolute. Midoriya stood in the ruins of the vault, the scepter in his hand. He was glowing. His eyes were no longer green, they were burning yellow. The green lightning of One for All had turned into a golden aura that wreathed him like a cloak. He looked at Shigaraki, who was cowering on the floor, clutching his head, blood running from his nose. "Leave," Midoriya said. His voice was layered, a chorus of 8 voices plus the cold metallic reverb of the stone. Shigaraki didn't argue. He couldn't. The command bypassed his ego and struck his motor cortex. He scrambled backward, terrified, dragging his injured leg, fleeing through the warp gate that Kurogiri, also terrified and bleeding from his eyes due to the psychic pressure, had desperately opened. The villains fled. The invasion was over. Midoriya dropped the scepter. As soon as contact was broken, the golden aura vanished. The boy collapsed, unconscious, his body seizing as the backlash hit. One for All retreated deep into his core, terrified and traumatized by the contact with the cosmic entity. But the damage was done. The pillar of light had not just stopped the battle, it had traveled deep in space past the orbit of Mars, A Sanctuary 2 warship sat in the silence of the void. On the bridge, a tall purple titan sat on his throne. Thanos had been scanning the cosmos for the signature of the stones for years. The signal from Earth had been faint before, masked by the distance and the interference of cosmic dust. But the beacon that Midoriya Izuku just lit, it was a flare gun fired in a dark room. Thanos looked at the holographic display. The location was triangulated. Sector 2814. Terra. Ebony Moore, Thanos said, his voice deep and resonant. Yes, my liege. The thin, pale alien bowed. Prepare the Q-ship. The stone has been found, and it appears the natives have learned how to use it. Back on Earth, the aftermath was grim. UA was half destroyed. The secret of the Scepter was out. Every news chopper had seen the boy with the golden staff. The gilded sickness survivors, those who had been cured by Loki, felt the pulse more strongly than anyone else. They didn't see Midoriya as a hero. They saw him as a prophet. In Tartarus, Loki stood up. He walked to the center of his cell. The psychic scream from Midoriya had shattered the dampeners in the prison walls. The electronics were fried. The locks were dead. Loki pushed his cell door open. It swung on its hinges with a metallic creak. He walked into the corridor. The guards were unconscious, knocked out by the psychic blast. Loki stepped over them. He didn't run. He walked with the leisurely pace of a man who had nowhere to go, because he already owned the place. He stopped at the cell of All for One. The villain was awake, staring at the door. He was blind, but he could feel the presence. You, All for One rasped. What did you do to the boy? I gave him a choice, Loki said, leaning against the doorframe. And he chose greatness. He chose consequence. You've doomed us, All for One said, a note of genuine fear in his voice. That light, it was a signal. Whatever you are running from, it will see us now. Yes, Loki agreed cheerfully. He is coming, the Titan, and when he arrives, this world of heroes and villains will seem very small indeed. You will need a god to fight him. And I suppose that is you? Who else? Loki smiled. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a faculty meeting to attend. I believe I'm up for tenure. Loki continued down the hall, humming. He reached the exit of Tartarus, stepped out into the night air, and took a deep breath. The sky was still shimmering with the after-image of the beam. He raised his hand, and the scepter, lying on the floor of the ruined UA vault miles away, rattled. It lifted into the air, smashed through the ceiling, and flew across the city at Mach speed, smacking into Loki's palm with a satisfying thud. The Mind Stone pulsed, happy to be home. Loki tapped the staff on the ground. His suit materialized, the green and gold leather replacing the orange jumpsuit. The horned helmet formed over his head. He looked at the city of Musutafu. It was broken, terrified, and waiting. Now, Loki whispered, let the real game begin. The camera pulling back from the solitary figure of the god of mischief standing at the gates of the ultimate prison, holding the power of the cosmos, while in the distance, the sirens wailed for a society that had just died, unaware that it was about to be conscripted into an interstellar war. The sky over Japan did not simply darken, it was strangled. The atmospheric displacement caused by the arrival of the Q ship created a vacuum effect that sucked the air out of the Kanto region for 3 agonizing seconds, silencing the screams of millions before the pressure wave returned with the force of a continental slap. The massive, ring-shaped vessel hung in the low orbit over Musutafu, casting a shadow that was absolute, a circle of midnight in the middle of the afternoon. It did not hum with engines. It radiated a gravitational menace that caused the tides in Tokyo Bay to recede 3 miles, grounding ships and exposing the muddy, trash-strewn seabed. This was not a villain attack. The pro-heroes, looking up from the streets, felt the difference in their marrow. Villains wanted attention, money, or chaos. This object wanted nothing. It was a harvesting tool. Loki Odinson stood on the precipice of the ruined UA. Main building, the wind whipping his green cloak around him. He held the scepter casually, the Mind Stone pulsing with a frantic staccato rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the planet. Behind him, the remnants of Japan's defense forces gathered. Endeavor, his flames burning with a desperate white-hot intensity, looked at the alien ship and then at the alien god. Hawks, grounded by the sheer density of the air pressure, sharpened his feathers. Best Genist, Edgeshot, and the surviving students of Class 1A stood in formation. A ragged line of children and celebrities conscripted into a war they did not understand. They were no longer heroes. They were indigenous infantry. Loki did not turn to face them. He spoke to the sky, his voice amplified by the scepter to ring in every ear within the prefecture. Do not look for a camera. Do not wait for a signal. The era of performance is over. What descends now is a famine. It has no politics. It has no mercy. It simply consumes. If you wish to live, you will forget your laws. You will forget your restraint. You will kill, or you will be harvested. The Q-ship opened. It did not release a beam of light, but a rain of monoliths. Drop pods, black and jagged like obsidian teeth, slammed into the city, crushing skyscrapers and cratering the streets. The pods opened, and the Outriders poured out. They were six-limbed beasts of genetically engineered hate, tearing through concrete and steel with claws that ignored durability quirks. The police line disintegrated in seconds. The pro-heroes engaged, but the logic of the fight was wrong. Mount Lady grew to giant size to stomp the creatures, but the Outriders swarmed her legs like army ants, biting through her density-shifted skin. She screamed, a sound of raw animal terror that stripped the glamour from the hero profession instantly. Kamui Woods tried to bind them, but the creatures chewed through his lacquer prison before it could set. Endeavor roared, unleashing a hell spider volley that sliced through a dozen beasts, cauterizing the wounds instantly. He was effective, a furnace of destruction. But for every 10 he killed, 50 more poured from the pods. The numbers were infinite. The battle was not about winning. It was about drowning. From the central drop pod, the Black Order descended. Ebony Moore floated above the chaos, his hands clasped behind his back, his face a mask of bored piety. He looked down at the heroes, at the frantic biological fireworks of their quirks, and sneered. "Hear me and rejoice," Moore whispered, his voice cutting through the explosions. "You have had the privilege of being saved by the great Titan. You may think this is suffering. No, it is salvation. The universal scales tip toward balance because of your sacrifice." Loki launched himself from the UA roof, riding a disc of hard light magic. He intercepted Moore in the air above the burning city. The collision of Asgardian sorcery and the Moore's telekinetic mastery created a shockwave that shattered every remaining window in Musutafu. Moore gestured, and the rebar from a collapsing building tore itself free, turning into a storm of metal needles aimed at Loki's throat. Loki spun the scepter, creating a barrier of golden energy that vaporized the steel. "You are a long way from home, Asgardian," Moore intoned, lifting a chunk of highway and hurling it. "The stone does not belong to you. It belongs to the void. And you are a preacher without a congregation," Loki retorted, shattering the highway with a blast of mind energy. "I have claimed this rock. These primitives are my pets. You do not kick the dog of a king." On the ground, the students of Class 1A were fighting for their lives. Bakugo Katsuki, was a whirlwind of explosions, blasting Outriders back, but his sweat was running dry. He was hyperventilating. The creatures didn't care about his yelling. They didn't care about his rank. One of them clamped its jaws onto his gauntlet, crushing the grenade bracer. Bakugo stared into the beast's eyeless face and felt the cold reality of the food chain. He was about to die. Then, a wall of ice slammed into the creature, flash freezing it. Todoroki Shoto slid past, his left side engulfed in flames. "Move, Bakugo. This isn't a tournament." Midoriya Izuku was nowhere to be seen. He was deep underground, in the fortified shelter beneath UA, sitting in a meditative trance. Recovery Girl and the creeping tendrils of the gilded sickness survivors surrounded him. The survivors, those who had been cured by Loki and retained the golden residue in their eyes, were forming a circle, holding hands. They were a battery. Midoriya was the conduit. The Mind Stone had opened a door in the boy's psyche, and he was currently swimming through the ocean of the collective unconscious, trying to find the one thing Loki had told him he needed: the lock. Above, the battle turned. Cull Obsidian, the massive brute of the Black Order, landed in the city center. He was met by Gigantomachia. The League of Villains had deployed their own weapon, not out of altruism, but out of territorial instinct. The two monsters collided with a force that registered as a magnitude 7.0 earthquake. Gigantomachia roared, his loyalty to his master fueling his strength. But Cull Obsidian was a veteran of planetary conquests. The alien hammer swung, catching Gigantomachia in the jaw. The sound was like a thunderclap inside a cave. Gigantomachia stumbled. Cull raised his weapon for the kill, but was interrupted by a beam of pure decay. Shigaraki Tomura stood on a pile of rubble, his hands spread. The decay spread up Cull's leg, turning the armored hide to dust. Cull roared in pain, activating his energy shield to sever the infected tissue. The villains and heroes were fighting side by side, not as allies, but as parallel desperate organisms. Then the gravity changed. The debris stopped falling. The smoke stopped rising. Everything hung suspended in the air. The Q-ship began to rotate. A blue beam of teleportation energy struck the center of the battlefield. Thanos had arrived. He did not wear his helmet. He wore his golden armor, and on his left hand was the Infinity Gauntlet. It was empty, save for the Power Stone, which glowed with a malevolent purple light. The Titan stepped out of the light, his boots crunching on the glassified street. He looked around, unimpressed by the quirks, the flames, the desperation. He wanted the stone. Endeavor saw him. The #1 hero saw the threat. He didn't think. He gathered every joule of heat his body could produce, pushing his internal temperature past the point of carbonization. Prominence burn. The beam of white fire struck Thanos squarely in the chest. It was an attack that could vaporize a Nomu. It could melt a tank. Thanos didn't even raise his shield. He simply raised the gauntlet. The Power Stone flashed. The beam of fire hit an invisible barrier and dispersed, scattering harmlessly into the sky. Thanos made a fist. Endeavor's flames were snuffed out instantly as the Power Stone seized control of the ambient energy in the area. Then, with a casual backhand motion, Thanos hit Endeavor with a pulse of kinetic force. The hero's armor shattered, his ribs shattered. He was flung across the city, crashing into the side of the UA barrier wall, leaving a smear of blood and broken dreams. The silence that followed was heavy. The heroes froze. Their strongest weapon had just been swatted like a fly. "Where is the trickster?" Thanos asked. His voice was calm, deep, and resonant. It did not sound like a monster. It sounded like a father disappointed in his children. Loki descended. He landed 10 meters from the Titan. He looked small. He looked fragile, but he held the scepter. "Almighty Thanos," Loki said, spreading his arms. "You look, well, a bit purple, but the exfoliation of war suits you." "The stone, Loki," Thanos said, holding out his hand. "Give it to me, and I will leave half of this wretched anthill alive. Withhold it, and I will strip the atmosphere from this planet and leave it as a graveyard to your vanity." "I have a counter-offer," Loki said. He stepped forward. The Mind Stone in the scepter flared. You leave now, and you never return." Thanos smiled. It was a sad smile. "You always did overestimate your tongue, Asgardian." Thanos lunged. The speed was deceptive. For a creature of his size, he moved like water. Loki didn't dodge. He shattered. The Loki that Thanos struck dissolved into green mist. An illusion. The real Loki appeared behind him, driving the blade of the scepter toward the gap in the Titan's neck armor. But Thanos knew the trick. He spun, catching the scepter's shaft in his bare hand. The force of the grip cracked the Chitauri metal. Thanos headbutted Loki. The god flew backward, crashing through a bus. Thanos ripped the scepter from the air. He looked at the yellow gem housing. He squeezed. The metal casing crumpled like foil. He plucked the Mind Stone from the wreckage. It was small, yellow, and perfect. "I expected more," Thanos muttered. He moved to place the stone into the gauntlet. But the stone did not seat. It repelled his hand. Thanos frowned. He looked at the gem. It wasn't glowing with the infinite consciousness of the universe. It was fading. It was shrinking. It dissolved into yellow dust in his fingers. "A fake," Thanos growled. He turned his gaze to the ruined UA High School. He felt it then. The resonance. The stone was not in the scepter. It was in the boy. Underground. Midoriya Izuku opened his eyes. They were no longer green. They were solid, burning gold. The circle of gilded survivors collapsed, their energy drained completely, unconscious but alive. Midoriya stood up. He didn't walk. He floated. The one-for-all quirks were gone. Black Whip, Float, Danger Sense. They had been consumed, metabolized by the Mind Stone to create a new, singular physiology. The stone had merged with the stockpile. The will of 8 generations of heroes had become the operating system for an Infinity Stone. Midoriya phased through the ceiling of the shelter. He rose through the earth, through the concrete, and erupted from the ground in front of Thanos. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like an avatar. Golden energy wreathed him, taking the shape of a cowl and a cape, but it was hard light, crackling with psychic static. Thanos looked at the child. He sensed the power. It was raw, unrefined, but massive. "The vessel is the weapon," Thanos noted. "Impressive." Midoriya didn't speak. He raised the hand. The air around Thanos solidified. The telekinetic hold was absolute. Thanos struggled, his muscles bulging, the power stone flaring purple to push back against the yellow grip. The ground beneath them cracked, the tectonic plates groaning under the stress of 2 cosmic forces wrestling for dominance of the local physics. Loki pulled himself out of the bus wreckage, wiping purple blood from his mouth. He laughed. It was a wet, ragged sound. "You see, Titan," Loki wheezed. "You collect stones. We build them." Midoriya clenched his fist. A blast of psychic energy slammed into Thanos, driving him to his knees. The Titan roared, raising the gauntlet. He used the Power Stone to shatter the telekinetic hold, the purple shockwave knocking Midoriya out of the air. Midoriya crashed, but bounced back instantly, his body moving on pure instinct. He engaged Thanos in hand-to-hand combat. It was a blur of gold and purple. Midoriya's punches, enhanced by the infinite mental calculation of the stone, found every weak point in Thanos' stance. But Thanos was durable. He took a punch that would have shattered a mountain and countered with a backhand that sent Midoriya skipping across the bay. "The boy is burning out," Ebony Maw observed from above. "His biology cannot sustain the output." Loki knew this. He could see Midoriya's cells beginning to fray. The golden cracks on the boy's skin were spreading. If he fought for another minute, he would detonate, taking Japan with him. Loki looked at the battlefield. The heroes were broken. The villains were fleeing. The world was ending. He looked at the scepter, broken on the ground. He looked at the Mind Stone embedded in the boy's chest, glowing brighter with every second. There was only one play left. The move of a trickster god who had learned the value of a long con. Loki teleported. He appeared not next to Thanos, but next to Midoriya. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Yield," Loki whispered. Midoriya looked at him, his eyes wild with the stone's influence. "What?" "Yield the power. You are the battery. I am the circuit. Give it to me." Midoriya hesitated. The vestiges screamed in his head. "Don't trust him. He's a villain." But underneath the screaming, the Mind Stone whispered, "He is the user." Midoriya let go. He pushed the energy out of his core, channeling the entirety of One for All and the Mind Stone's resonance into Loki's hand. Loki gasped. His head snapped back. His Asgardian physiology, far denser and more durable than a human's, drank the power like a starving man drinking wine. His eyes turned gold. His horns grew, shifting from metal to pure, hard light energy. His cloak turned white. He turned to Thanos. The Titan stood up, brushing dust from his armor. "You just prolonged the inevitable." Loki smiled. And this time, it was not the smile of a lie. It was the smile of a truth so terrible it had to be hidden. "I'm not fighting you, Thanos," Loki said. His voice echoed from the clouds. "I'm rewriting the map." Loki raised both hands. He didn't fire a beam. He grabbed the fabric of reality itself. He used the Mind Stone not to destroy, but to hide. He reached into the collective consciousness of the planet, every hero, every villain, every civilian, and pulled. He pulled their perception, their reality, their very location in the cosmic web. A golden fog rolled over Japan, then over the Pacific, then over the world. Thanos looked around. The city was fading. The sky was fading. The stars were going out. "What is this sorcery?" Thanos demanded, activating the Power Stone to burn away the fog. But the fog wasn't physical. It was conceptual. "You cannot conquer what you cannot find," Loki whispered. The world dissolved around Thanos. The Q-ship dissolved. The Black Order dissolved. They weren't being destroyed. They were being ejected. Loki was severing the timeline. He was taking Earth MHA and folding it into a pocket dimension. A bubble universe sustained by the Mind Stone and the will of One for All. He was locking the door from the inside. Thanos found himself standing on the bridge of his ship, back in deep space. The view screen showed nothing. Where Earth had been, there was only empty void, no debris, no planet, just a faint golden shimmer that faded after a second. The Titan stared at the empty space. He checked the scanners, no signature. The Mind Stone was gone. The planet was gone. "Impossible," Ebony Maw whispered. Thanos sat on his throne. He respected the tactic. It was cowardly, yes, but it was effective. He removed the piece from the board. Thanos said, "Set a course for the Soul Stone. We will return. The bubble will pop eventually. Inside the bubble, the world did not end. The golden fog lifted. The sun shone on Musutafu. The fires were out. The Q-ship was gone. The Outriders were piles of ash. Midoriya lay on the ground, powerless. His hair was back to green, but it was streaked with white. The one-for-all fire was an ember, almost extinguished. He looked up. Loki stood on the highest peak of the rubble. He was glowing with a faint, permanent luminescence. He still held the power. He had not given it back. The heroes gathered around, Aizawa clutching his arm, Bakugo holding his broken gauntlet. They looked at the alien. They realized with a sinking dread that the war was over, but the occupation had just begun. Loki looked down at them. He tapped the air, and a throne of green glass materialized. He sat down. "Class is dismissed," Loki said. "Welcome to the new semester." He snapped his fingers. The barrier around the world hardened. The stars in the night sky were replaced by a static image of the cosmos, a projection to keep the humans calm. They were safe. They were hidden. And they were his. The age of heroes was dead. The timeline of the sovereign had begun. Loki closed his eyes and listened to the thoughts of 8 billion people, all of them finally, perfectly quiet. 3 years had passed since the vanishing of the stars, though the citizens of the new prefecture rarely spoke of the event. To speak of the time before the veil was considered an act of supreme ingratitude, a social faux pas that could lower one's standing score within the omnipresent Mind Stone network. The sky above Japan was a beautiful, flawless azure during the day, and a deep, comforting velvet at night, scattered with constellations that were aesthetically pleasing, but astronomically incorrect. The North Star was fixed, unmoving, directly above the spires of the Royal Citadel, which had been constructed over the bones of the former UA. High school. The weather was scheduled. Rain fell only on Tuesdays and Thursdays, between 2 and 4 in the morning to maintain the water table. Typhoons were a myth of the old world. The chaotic, frightening unpredictability of nature and supernature had been domesticated by the will of the sovereign. Izuku Midoriya sat on a bench in the royal gardens, watching the koi fish swim in a pond that was perfectly clear. He wore the white robes of the High Council, the uniform designated for those who had touched the infinite. He was 20 years old now, though his hair remained streaked with the shock-white trauma of the merger. He had no quirk. The embers of One for All had finally gone cold, 6 months after the sequestration. The power fully metabolized into the barrier that kept their pocket dimension hidden from the Titan's gaze. He did not miss the power. He missed the noise. He missed the frantic, messy struggle of people trying to be better. In this world, no one needed to try. They were simply corrected. If a man felt the urge to steal a wallet, a sudden golden migraine would gently suggest that he sit down and contemplate his life choices. If a villain attempted to activate a destructive quirk, their motor functions would simply cease until the authorities arrived. It was a utopia of absolute safety, purchased with the currency of free will. Katsuki Bakugo approached the bench. He wore the green and gold armor of the Praetorian Guard. He did not yell anymore. His explosions were used only for construction and controlled demolition. He looked at Midoriya with eyes that were tired, stripped of their fire. "The king summons you," Bakugo said quietly. "The annual stability review." Midoriya nodded and stood up. They walked together through the silent corridors of the citadel. There were no students rushing to class. The academy was no longer a school for heroes. It was a seminary for administrators. The concept of a hero had been retired. One did not need heroes when one had a god. They entered the throne room, a cavernous hall dominated by the floating, hard light architecture of Asgardian design, fused with Japanese minimalism. At the far end, upon a throne of fused Chitauri metal and Japanese steel, sat Loki Odinson. He did not look triumphant. He looked exhausted. The sovereign of Earth MHA was pale, his eyes rimmed with dark circles that no illusion could hide. His hand gripped the scepter as if it were the only thing keeping him upright, maintaining a pocket dimension. Bending reality to hide a planet from the rest of the universe required a constant, agonizing expenditure of focus. He had not slept in 3 years. To sleep would be to let the bubble pop. To sleep would be to let Thanos in. Loki looked at Midoriya. The connection between them was still there, a faint psychic hum. The boy was the battery that had started the engine. The god was the mechanic keeping it running. "Status," Loki croaked, his voice lacking the silky arrogance of his youth. It was dry, brittle. Midoriya bowed slightly. "Social cohesion is at 99%, my king. The agricultural yields are optimal. The distant faction in the Hokkaido sector has been pacified. They are currently repainting the northern wall." Loki nodded slowly. "Good. And the veil?" Midoriya hesitated. He could feel it too, the tremors in the fabric of their artificial reality. The bubble was strong, but the ocean outside was vast and pressurized. "The veil holds," Midoriya lied. "But we detected a fluctuation in the cosmic background radiation yesterday. A scan. Something brushed against the outer shell." Loki's grip on the staff tightened, his knuckles white. "He knows," the god whispered. "He cannot see us, he cannot hear us, but he knows where we aren't. He is checking the empty spaces." Bakugo stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. "Let him come. We are ready. We have trained the populace. We have the Nomu garrisons. We have the Magitech turrets." "You have toys," Loki snapped, the sudden shout echoing through the hall. "You have sticks and stones against a force that murders stars. Do you not understand? I did not hide us to buy time for a war. I hid us because we lost the war before it began. This terrarium is the only victory available. Survival is the victory." The silence returned, heavier than before. This was the secret that only the High Council knew. The peace was not a triumph. It was a hostage situation. They were hiding in a closet while a serial killer walked through the house. Loki slumped back, rubbing his temples. The scepter hummed, a low, discordant note. "Leave me," he commanded. "Return to your duties. Keep them happy. Keep them quiet. If they dream too loudly, the walls shake." Midoriya turned to leave, but stopped. He looked at the lonely figure on the throne. A god who had wanted a kingdom, and had found himself a jailer of a paradise he despised. "Are you happy?" Midoriya asked. The question was forbidden, but the former hero had earned the right to ask it. Loki looked up. His green eyes, once filled with mischief, were now filled with the terrible clarity of foresight. "I am burdened with glorious purpose, child. Happiness is a luxury for those who do not have to hold up the sky." Midoriya and Bakugo left the citadel, stepping out into the artificial twilight. The fake stars were coming out. The city of Musutafu glowed with a soft, golden bioluminescence, a gift from the king to reduce energy consumption. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. It was dead. In the shadows of an alleyway, far from the palace, a figure watched them pass. It was Shigaraki Tomura. He was ragged, his decay quirk suppressed by a collar of uru metal, forcing him to live as a scavenger in the sewers of the utopia. He scratched at his neck, but the skin did not flake. He looked up at the full sky. He felt the vibration that Midoriya had lied about. He felt the crack in the world. He smiled, a dry, cracked expression of nihilistic hope. The king was tired. The battery was draining. And outside the walls, the Titan was waiting. Shigaraki reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, jagged piece of rock. It wasn't from Earth. It was a fragment of a drop pod that he had kept hidden from the cleaning drones for 3 years. It hummed faintly, reacting to the proximity of its master light years away. It was a beacon. Let the bubble pop, Shigaraki whispered to the silence. Let the real game restart. High above the atmosphere, beyond the golden illusion, beyond the folded space-time. The dark void of the true universe was cold and indifferent. But in that darkness, a massive ship drifted, scanning the emptiness. On the bridge, a purple hand adjusted the sensitivity of a sensor array. The soul stone in the infinity gauntlet flared orange, sensing a soul that was hiding. Thanos did not smile. He simply adjusted the course. He had all the time in the universe. The bubble would burst, and when it did, he would be there to correct the anomaly. The story of the collision was over. The story of the siege was eternal. The timeline of the Sovereign continued, one breathless, terrified second at a time, held together by the will of a trickster god who had finally learned that the heaviest lie of all was peace.